The best weapon in the DLC is actually a shield, even after it was nerfed in the recent patch. The thrusting shield allows you to block and attack at the exact same time, and all you need to do is turtle up real nice and you can destroy any boss in the game. Let's go! Let me know what you think of this build in the comments down below. So this revolves around the thrusting shield, that new shield that was added to the game. Now there is a couple of these in the DLC. There's the Carrion thrusting shield, which is the one we're using today, as well as the original, just normal thrusting shield. I'm using the Carrion thrusting shield as it does a slightly little bit more damage, and I just like the look of it a little bit better. Now how this essentially works, and then we'll get into like the nitty gritty, because it's not just as simple as like attacking. There's a lot of things you need to do to sort of make this build really sing. But essentially the main thing is that you'll be holding block basically the entire time and then attacking at the same time. Now while you're holding block and attacking as well, very similar to how you do like a shield poke with a spear, in this case exactly the same way, you will hold that block and block damage while actually attacking. In the most recent patch that just went live, patch 1.12.3, they'd actually fix a bug where successfully guarding while attacking using the thrusting shield weapon type could consume less stamina than intended. So essentially what was happening there is that you won't be consuming stamina if you were attacking at the same time that their attack hit. You would only consume stamina for your actual like attack swing and not for like blocking. So they've definitely significantly increased the amount of stamina it takes to use the thrusting shields in this way. But all it really requires now is just like smart stamina usage, and you can absolutely still really sing with this build. I'm combining it with some incantations as well as some weapon greases and other buffs that are relevant to certain encounters to increase the overall damage we're doing, plus a few other things. And we may as well start getting into those nitty gritty details, starting with the equipment. Now, obviously here we're using the Carrion thrusting shield. To get this thrusting shield, it's located at the back section of the storehouse, basically from the back storehouse side of Grace. It's just up the way a little bit past that. You'll need to defeat a Fire Knight and it will actually be there for you to pick up. Now, one thing to note here is that this shield doesn't have 100% physical damage negation, so you will take a tiny little bit of chip damage anytime you block. Plus, a key stat here to point out is the boost stat, which we want to make sure that is as high as possible so we don't lose too much stamina when we do block all of these attacks. Now, on the shield itself, I have the Poison Flower blooms twice, because the main thing that we're doing here is trying to trigger Scarlet Rot or Poison, then using that to like pop the effect for like a massive outburst of damage, and you can put this on like anything. I've got it on the current like heavy affinity because I'm almost exclusively a strength build, and I'll explain why in a little bit. But the main key part of that is we're allowing us to put any sort of greases and etc. on the thrusting shield itself. We can still trigger that status effect via that method, and then we can pop it via the Ash of War itself. And then in some scenarios where like you can't trigger Scarlet Rod or what have you, you can switch this out to the Barricade Shield or even to the Shield Strike that it does actually come with, just to make sure you keep that heavy affinity. Now I'm also using the Claw Mark seal here as it is a strength based seal, so that's why we're running that. For armor, I'm wearing Raksasha's helm and the rest of her set here because it does increase your overall damage, but it does increase the amount of damage that you actually take as well. Now, because we are, in a way, we're tanking damage because we're blocking basically every hit that's coming towards us, the extra damage you get from this set is like really worthwhile because you're not necessarily worried too much about missing a roll here and there, which does happen occasionally, but because you're trying to essentially shield block everything, you still get that benefit from getting that damage increase while lowering the amount of like negatives of actually having that increased damage taken. For talismans, I'm using the Dragon Crest Great Shield talisman, the two-handed sword talisman, because we will be two-handing this thrusting shield, so it does increase the damage of our overall attacks. The Great Shield talisman to boost guarding ability. Now that's that guard boost that we were talking about before, so essentially the higher that stat is on the shield itself, and this increases it even further, that will then allow you to tank more hits into your stamina before you do run out of stamina, which is really important. The last talisman slot, and to be honest, a few of them is situational depending on where you're at, right? If you're fighting a boss that you're using Scarlet Rot or Poison on, you're probably going to run the Kindred of Rot Exaltation. Likewise, if you're using Blood Loss on the weapon via a grease, then you'll probably run the Blood Loss talisman. And then if you're, say, running, fire or magic or holy damage, if you're fighting night bosses or something, you might run the Scorpion Charm specifically for those encounters, or running the Two-Headed Turtle talisman is also fantastic for this build, right? To greatly increase your stamina recovery, as it is so important for this build. I tinker with my talismans a lot with this build, depending on the situation that I'm going into. Like having knowledge of these boss encounters and what they're weak to, or just like Googling it is super beneficial for this build, and tinkering with those talismans to match those encounters will really set you up for success. And likewise for incantations, I'm essentially just running Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow here as the main ones, plus the different incantations that can add the effects to my weapon buffs, right? This can be the Electrify effect, which I don't use too often, Order's Blade, which you use on all of your skeletons and night bosses, that sort of thing, the Poison Armament buff, and the Blood Flame buff for fire and a little bit of blood loss as well. Now, on top of that, you've also got all the various weapon greases, especially the new ones that come in the DLC that improving on the existing ones. All of these are fantastic, right? And the key thing in here is to match the weakness that you're fighting the target. When in doubt, I've always leaned into the Scarlet Rot or the Poison Armament because we're using the Poison Flower Blooms twice, so you can trigger that status effect. Not only does it do solid damage, just tick damage, which is fantastic, you can then pop it as like a good like fight finisher in a way, right? Like if the target's nearly dead, you can use that to like finish them off just to get that last little bit of damage off as well. But you've got all those options and you can craft them as well, right? Like you can craft all the greases if you've got the cookbooks, but leaning into those and making sure you've got some sort of an effect on the weapon is really important. So don't be afraid to sort of back out of the fight for a little bit just to reapply whatever status effect you're going to have on your weapon. Attributes for this build, I did mention that we're almost exclusively leaning into strength here, right? Now, vigor and endurance are both just as important. So you want to hit that main sort of like soft cap here of 60 vigor and 50 endurance. So you're getting the most out of your stamina and HP. Mind isn't super important, right? Like we're only running 20 mind here for that FP because we're not really using it a whole lot. And then strength, you want to absolutely max out to like 80 or above here because we're running this as a heavy setup because we're two-handing it as well. So you get that extra damage from two-handing the weapon in your strength setup. I have got 30 faith here. You don't necessarily need 30 faith, like as long as you're hitting the minimum requirements for like Golden Vow, which is I think 26 off the top of my head, and then make sure as well that you've got 15 intelligence so that you can actually meet the weapon requirements for the Carrion Thrusting Shield. Let's get into some tips for this build. We'll start with some buffs for your Great Rune. Radahn's Great Rune is the one here for the HP and the stamina primarily. For your like Wondrous Physique, there's really a few options here. I've been running the Opaline hard tier for the like reduction to my overall damage, like that's fantastic. You could run the Deflecting hard tier to enhance your Spontaneous Guard, but I don't really see the point as you're not really doing Spontaneous Guards here. The purpose is to like hold your guard the whole time. And then otherwise I would definitely be using some of the stamina ones, whether that be the Green Spill or Viridian, what have you, some of those that I would definitely be running here. And then obviously the Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow buffs, and then you're getting a weapon buff as well, whatever you're putting on your weapon. So make sure you do all of that before you enter the arena. Then you'll enter the arena and then you're basically set to go, and then just reapply especially the weapon buff as that fight goes on. I wouldn't worry too much about Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow unless you've got the time to, but the weapon buff you definitely want to keep active for those status effects. Now, speaking of those status effects, it is like the most important thing that regardless of what you're fighting, you're actually using a status effect on this weapon. It's what really makes it sing. The overall damage on like the poke isn't exceptional, but the trade-off here is that you just essentially get to stand there and hit them, right? Now, because you can do that, you will stagger enemies quite often. Like I've noticed on certain bosses that because you can just stand there and tank those hits and keep poking away, the stance or poise damage on this is actually pretty solid. So you will definitely break stances that way. And then having the effect of being able to apply status effects will significantly improve the overall damage that this does because of how limited, you know, the overall damage output here is, right? Like this isn't a really flashy build that you're going to be doing some really cool stuff happening on screen, right? You're literally just standing there, turtling up and poking away. One thing to note here is that you will occasionally need to dodge. So don't wear too heavy of armor that you are going into that heavy load equipment. You definitely can if you like super want to turtle up. But on a lot of the boss fights that have grabs, especially some of the endgame bosses in the base game that have a grab effect, you can't actually block a grab effect. You have to like roll out of the way for the invincibility frames. So just keep that in mind that when you do see those like wind up for the grabs, that you do actually get out of the way because you can't block it. And that's a little trick in your mind to like think about, because you know you sort of get used to just being not invincible, but just like holding your shield and be like, oh, it's fine, I can tank this, no worries. But then those grab effects you can't actually avoid. So just make sure you do get out of the way for those. And likewise for some of those bosses that have like really massive heavy hitting attacks, Malakath is a great example here. Like maybe switching up your Ash of War to something like Barricade Shield so you can actually tank some of those hits. Malenia as well, it's definitely more valuable than obviously running, especially for Malenia, running Poison Flower Blooms twice, because you know you can't actually Scarlet Rot her and she has very high poison resistance as well. So you've got that flexibility to switch up the build in that way. But let me know your thoughts on this build in the comments down below. I wasn't really a fan of the Thrusting Shields when I I picked them up first until I realized that you're actually just supposed to hold block the whole time and poke, and now I actually really like them. So interested in your opinion in the comments as well. But thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.